Journalism for me was never just a job. It was an opportunity to uncover the truth, to be the voice of those whom no one hears. Perhaps it started back in my childhood, when I first encountered the cruelty of this world. I was born and raised in Seoul, in an ordinary family. My mother worked as a university professor, and my father was an engineer. They dreamed of me following in their footsteps, choosing a stable profession that would ensure me a peaceful future. But I was always bored living within the boundaries they set for me. I longed for something more. When I was 10 years old, I realized for the first time how unfair this world could be. That evening, I was coming home from school and saw a boy sitting on the steps of an abandoned store. He was thin, dressed in ragged clothes, and his large dark eyes looked at passers-by with a plea. I couldn't just walk past. "Are you hungry?" I asked, feeling a strange sense of pity and helplessness rise in my chest. The boy nodded but didn't say anything. In my bag, I had a rice cake that my mother had given me for lunch. I handed it to the boy, and he eagerly grabbed it, as if he feared I might change my mind. I sat next to him, watching as he ate, and then asked, "Where are your parents?" He didn't answer, just shrugged. I didn't know what to say. I was 10, and he looked about my age. At that time, I didn't understand why children could end up on the street. I just wanted to help. From that day on, I came to that store every evening. I brought him food, my brother's old clothes, notebooks. I talked to him, but he rarely responded. He was always quiet, as if he feared that if he said something wrong, I would disappear. And then one day, he just vanished. I searched for him for several days, but no one knew where he had gone. Maybe he was taken to an orphanage, maybe he left with someone. But that feeling, helplessness before the system, before the injustice, before the fact that I couldn't help him, stayed with me. It was then that I decided I would become a journalist. I would search for the truth, speak for those who cannot. Now, many years later, I stood in front of the mirror in the editorial office, looking at my reflection. Tall, slender, with long dark hair gathered in a low ponytail. Clear facial features, deep brown eyes that reflected stubbornness. I always tried to look strict and professional, but even with perfect makeup, I was still that girl who once wanted to save a homeless boy. My life had led me to this moment. Today, I was supposed to meet the person everyone talks about, but no one knows anything about. Lee Min-hyuk, a business genius, a billionaire who built an empire from nothing. He avoided the press, and no one knew why he agreed to give an interview to me. But one thing I knew for sure, this meeting would change my life. Listen carefully. Ji-yeon, the editor-in-chief, Hwang Sung-ju, adjusted his glasses on the bridge of his nose and looked at me intently. "This piece must be perfect. This is your chance to level up." I nodded, holding my notebook. There was excitement in his voice. "We don't need superficial questions like what's it like to be the youngest billionaire in Korea? Or what did you have for breakfast? I need something sensational. Rumors about his shadowy deals, possible manipulations, a past no one knows about. Get him to show some emotions." "You want me to provoke him?" I clarified. "No, but if you manage to make him say something he didn't plan to, that would be great." I took a deep breath. I knew this interview would be an important step in my career. But something inside me told me this conversation would be unlike any other. I left the office and hailed a taxi. Inside, everything tightened with anxious anticipation. I replayed the questions in my head, trying to imagine how he would respond. But what worried me the most was that I knew almost nothing about him. No one knew. Lee Min-hyuk's office was located in a skyscraper in the center of Seoul. The glass building towered over the others, almost symbolizing the power of its owner. When I stepped inside, I was met with cool air and dim light. "Good afternoon," a young woman in an elegant suit approached me. "Are you Han Ji-yeon?" "Yes." "My name is Song Miran. I'm Lee Min-hyuk's assistant. Please follow me." I could feel her gaze assessing me. She was professional, but there was something more in her eyes, caution. "He doesn't give interviews," she suddenly said as we walked to the elevator. "I know." "Then you must be curious why he agreed." She looked at me with a slight smirk, but I didn't respond. I was asking myself that question too. The door to the office opened, and I saw him. Lee Minhyuk was sitting at a massive desk, going through papers. When I entered, he slowly lifted his head. His gaze, deep, penetrating, as though piercing right into my soul. In that moment, I felt a strange sensation. As if I had seen him before. Like we were familiar with each other. But from where? "Han Ji-yeon," he said, and there was something in his voice that made shivers run down my spine. I gripped the notebook tighter. "Thank you for agreeing to the interview, Mr. Lee." He smiled, but there was a hint of something else in his eyes. He remembered her. The girl with kind eyes, who in the distant past approached him when he was shaking from the cold on the steps of an abandoned store. He had been nothing then. Just an ordinary homeless boy, abandoned and forgotten by the world. People walked by, not noticing him, and if they did, it was only to turn away with contempt. But she stopped. "Are you hungry?" Her voice was soft, warm. She wasn't scared, didn't avoid him like the others. She simply gave him food, then came back again and again. He remembered her. He remembered how she talked about school, how she laughed, how she tried to cheer him up. And then he disappeared. But fate had other plans. Now she was sitting before him, grown up, confident, but with the same fire in her eyes. She didn't recognize him. And he wasn't going to remind her. "Why are journalists so interested in my personal life?" Lee Minhyuk asked with a light smile, leaning back in his chair. "There are plenty of people like me." I squinted, watching him. He looked relaxed, but there was something predatory in his eyes, as if he had already anticipated my answers. "Yes, there are indeed many like you," I admitted, making notes in my notebook. "But the difference is that their path to success is well known. Wealthy parents, connections, large inheritances. But your path is a mystery. You appeared out of nowhere, with no past, no biography. You're the dark horse, and that's what intrigues everyone." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes that I didn't catch. But in the next second, he smiled again, as though my answer amused him. "So, I'm a mystery you're so eager to solve? Isn't that why you agreed to the interview?" I tilted my head slightly, carefully watching his reaction. He didn't respond, only continued looking at me, as if studying me. His gaze made me uncomfortable. I cleared my throat, pushing away the strange feeling, and decided to ask what had been on my mind since the first second of our meeting. "Tell me. Have we met before?" He froze for a moment. It was just an instant, but I noticed it. Very doubtfully, he replied calmly, shrugging. "I think I would remember a journalist like you." Something in his voice made me doubt him. He said it too. Intentionally. I frowned, but decided to set that thought aside for now and return to the interview. "All right, let's start with the obvious. At 27, you became the youngest CEO in the country. What led you to such success?" "Work," he shrugged. "And a little bit of luck." Don't you think that a little bit of luck is too modest of an answer for someone who has no connections, no rich family, no loud past, yet somehow made it to the top? You like the word no, Miss Han, he noted, tilting his head. You like avoiding answers, Mr. Lee. He smirked. Everyone has a past, but not every past is worth discussing. Is yours that secretive? Perhaps. He was playing with me. I could feel it. Every time I pushed him towards something important, he skillfully redirected the conversation. But not in a hostile way, more like with a hidden amusement, as if he found it interesting to watch me try to get through his barriers. Then another question. You are rumored to have connections with people that are not usually discussed in the press. Are these rumors or the truth? Who are these mysterious those? Minhyuk interlocked his fingers, watching me curiously. People whose names are feared to be spoken aloud. Those who stand behind shadow deals and closed contracts. Those who don't need journalists because they don't like the truth. A silence hung in the room. Lee Minhyuk was staring at me, and I felt the tension between us intensify. But he didn't look scared or irritated. On the contrary, he looked intrigued. You're brave, Miss Han. I like that. I didn't know whether to be happy about this or worried. But before I could ask a new question, he suddenly looked at his watch and stood up. Unfortunately, I have to go. I have a meeting. I blinked, not immediately realizing that he had just stood up and walked out, cutting the interview short. Wait, but... You can stay and finish your notes, he said, heading for the door. My assistant will show you out when you're ready. I didn't have time to protest. He was already gone. I was left alone in his office. In the huge, impeccably clean room, filled with a sense of power and mystery. In front of me was my notebook, with a pile of questions. But now, there were many more. I walked down the hallway of Lee Minhyuk's office, trying to organize my thoughts, but it seemed impossible. The interview had been nothing like I had expected. He played with me, answering just enough to keep my interest, but no more. And his reaction to my question about the past. There was something there. I could feel it. Miss Han, a voice came from behind. I turned around and saw Sun Miran, Minhyuk's assistant. She caught up with me and handed me a small business card. This is from Mr. Lee, she said with a mysterious smile. I frowned and took the card. Black, thick paper, stylish font. Just a name and number. But when I flipped it over, there was a neatly written note. To continue the interview, it must be in an informal setting. I looked up at Miran, but she only nodded slightly, as if confirming that this was not a joke. What does this mean? I asked. Exactly what it says. Her voice sounded almost amused. Mr. Lee rarely engages with journalists, but you've intrigued him. I gritted my teeth. He was intrigued, but not as an interviewer. More like a player who wanted to see how far I was willing to go. I didn't say another word. I just put the business card in my pocket and left the building. When I returned to the office, Hwang Songju was already waiting for me. Well? He asked immediately as soon as I stepped through the door of his office. He's cautious, I said, sitting down opposite him. He answers questions, but doesn't say anything specific. Expected, the editor crossed his arms. But did you get anything? I shrugged. He said everyone has a past, but not every past is worth discussing. Songju squinted. That means his past isn't all that clean. Or maybe he just wants to create that illusion. The editor shook his head. We need information, Ji-young. Any information. Do whatever it takes to find out who he really is. I nodded, but inside I felt uneasy. Lee Minhyuk wasn't just a rich businessman. There was something else about him. And that scared me. After work, I stopped by a small cafe owned by my best friend, Yoon Hairi. You look like you just talked to the devil himself, she joked, placing a cup of coffee in front of me. I smiled tiredly. Almost like that. I told her about today's interview. How Lee Minhyuk acted, how he avoided answering questions, and how, at the end, he gave me a business card. Wait. Hairi froze with a cup in her hands. You mean he offered to continue the interview, but only in an informal setting? I nodded. He's not trying to seduce you, is he? I rolled my eyes. It's a business interest, Hairi. She snorted. Well. Have you thought that he might be dangerous? I thought for a moment. No, but he makes me uneasy. And also, I hesitated, not knowing how to say it out loud. I have this strange feeling that I know him. Hyrie raised her eyebrows. Know him? Well, I can't explain it. His voice, his gaze, even the way he speaks. Something about him feels familiar, but I can't remember where from. Maybe you met before? I shook my head. I would remember such a person. Hyrie shrugged. 53. Maybe fate brought you together? I smirked. Don't start. When I got home, I felt exhausted, but thoughts of Minhyuk wouldn't leave me alone. I took a shower, letting the warm water wash away the tension of the day. But even after that, his words, his gaze, that barely noticeable smile when I asked about his past, kept spinning in my head. I lay in bed, wrapped in a blanket. In my hands was his business card. A small piece of paper, but for some reason, it felt like something bigger. I couldn't stop thinking about him. The morning felt unusual. I woke up later than usual, and immediately felt a chill in my chest, a premonition of something important. Like something that was supposed to happen was about to happen. I pulled back the curtains and looked out the window, but the street was as lively as always. I had breakfast on the go, trying not to think about what awaited me today. My mind kept swirling with thoughts of Lee Min-hyuk and the business card with the invitation for an informal meeting. Last night, I turned it over and over in my hands until late, trying to figure out what it meant and what he wanted from me. But instead of clarity, there was only fog. At work, my colleague immediately greeted me, looking a bit nervous. Han, you've got a package. It's on your desk. I sighed and walked to my desk. There was a neatly sealed box on it. I opened it, and inside I found a dress, a red silk mask, and a small card. I immediately read the text, "Be ready at 7 p.m., Miss Han." My heart skipped a beat. This was definitely not an ordinary gift. It was a sign. But what kind of sign? And where would this lead? Lee Min-hyuk, as always, was playing his game. He knew how to keep me on edge. I tried to focus on my work, but my thoughts kept drifting back to that mysterious package. I thought it might just be another game, a way to test how far I was willing to go for my career. But deep down, I felt that it wasn't so simple. In the evening, after work, I went home. The shower helped me relax, but my thoughts still wouldn't leave me. I sat in a towel, staring at the dress lying on the bed. My hand reached out for it, but doubt held me back. At first, I thought it was just a gesture from Lee Min-hyuk, trying to play a game. But then I was tormented by the thought that it could be more serious. Was I really ready to become a part of his game? Should I take the risk? I took a deep breath, stood up, and made my decision. It was time to find out what he had in mind. I put on the dress, red, form-fitting, with thin straps that accentuated every curve of my body. The dress fit perfectly, as if it had been made just for me. Then I let my hair down and carefully wove a red ribbon into it, exactly like the one in the mask. I looked at myself in the mirror, not recognizing who I saw. Who was I now? The girl awaiting this strange meeting? Or just a pawn in someone else's game? Taking another deep breath, I walked to the door. When I opened it, a black car with tinted windows was waiting outside. The car was new, gleaming. The driver, a man in a black suit, opened the door for me, and I couldn't help but feel a slight flutter of excitement. "Where are we going?" I asked, getting inside. The driver remained silent. He just closed the door and drove off. From time to time, I glanced out the window, but I couldn't make sense of it. We drove through the city center on a foggy night. Could I trust this man? What awaited me? When we arrived at the location, I noticed that there were many similar cars gathered there. The large gates of the mansion opened, and I realized this was a place for the chosen. People in luxurious outfits stood outside, and the whole setting felt like a mask, hiding the truth that I knew nothing about. I got out of the car and tried not to lose my composure. I held my head high, trying not to show how much the unfolding events were unsettling me. I wasn't here to be a spectator. I was here for my work, for my career. When I entered the mansion, I was struck by the luxury. Huge halls decorated with gold, antique paintings, incredible chandeliers glowing with soft, muted light. People, conversations, laughter, everything intertwined. The atmosphere in the air was one of mystery and opulence. I felt out of place in this world, but there was no denying the allure of this place. I tried to find him in the crowd, Lee Min-hyuk. And finally, I saw him. On the balcony of the second floor, he stood, watching me. His gaze was frozen, yet it radiated incredible admiration, as if he had been waiting for me to finally appear. He nodded, as if everything had been predicted. I knew you would come, his voice was soft but confident. I stood before him, feeling my heart beat faster. Now, everything was about to begin. I couldn't stop thinking about what awaited me. As I approached Lee Min-hyuk, his gaze was calm, but there was an unfathomable depth to it, as if he already knew what I was about to do. He slowly raised a glass of wine and extended it to me. It's poisoned, he smiled, as if joking, but there was no amusement in his eyes, only a genuine game. I looked at the glass and then at him, not knowing how to react. But in the end, I took it. There was doubt, but not enough to refuse. I took a sip of wine, feeling its taste, tart, deep, just like Lee. He stood across from me, watching me with a piercing gaze. Squinting, he finally asked, "So, why are you here, Han Ji-yeon?" I paused, thinking about his words. Did I really want to know more about him? About his life, his successes? Or was this just a game? I exhaled and, feeling a weight in my chest, I answered, I wanted to know about your path to success. And about your past, not these private parties. His expression changed. He smirked, but there was something in that expression I didn't like. I felt the tension rising, and suddenly, I felt uneasy. I turned, planning to leave, but Lee quickly grabbed me by the waist. Where are you going, Ji-yeon? You're not leaving without getting answers. I want from you what you want from me. I froze, feeling his hand on my waist. I'm just an ordinary girl, Lee. I really have nothing to tell you. I tried to break free, but he held me tighter. He slowly let me go and stood up. Let's go. His voice was calm, but firm. He pulled me through the crowd, ignoring the glances of people who were watching us. I felt uncomfortable, as if everything that was happening wasn't my choice, but somehow, I was still walking along. We passed through several rooms and stopped in front of a door leading to his office. Lee opened the door and invited me in. Inside, there was soft lighting, muted and creating a sense of privacy. I froze by the door, not knowing how to behave in this strange, tense space. He poured himself a whiskey and sat on the leather couch, not taking his eyes off me. Come in and sit across from me, he said, exuding such confidence that I didn't dare refuse. I sat across from him, feeling all my thoughts becoming unclear. He watched me with such intensity that I began to feel uncomfortable. Lee remained silent for a moment, then said, You look beautiful tonight, Ji-yeon. He got up and walked over to me. Red silk suits you. Before I could respond, he ran his hands through my hair. Everything that was happening felt unreal, like a dream, but I could feel that he controlled every moment. I couldn't look away from his eyes, and a question formed in my mind that I didn't dare ask. What did he really want from me? Then Lee said, What are you willing to do to get answers, Han Ji-yeon? I felt my heart tighten. It was too much. But instead of answering, I suddenly poured wine on his shirt. The strong smell of alcohol filled the air, and I felt extremely awkward. Sorry, you. I couldn't finish the sentence, as I quickly turned and headed for the door. His gaze stayed on me, but I couldn't stay any longer. Everything inside me screamed that I shouldn't have been here, that it was a mistake. I didn't even look back as I left his office. When I was already in the hallway, I suddenly stopped. What am I doing? Why did I even come here? Why did I pour the wine on him? What was I thinking when I agreed to this? I felt disgusted with myself. I quickly called a taxi, not even noticing how the thoughts were spinning in my head. Everything that happened today made no sense. He wanted a game, but it seemed I had become part of that game. In the taxi, I sat in silence, trying to gather my thoughts. I got home, took off the dress, and without thinking, tossed it in the trash. I threw Lee Min-hyuk's business card in the same trash, as if that was the way to get rid of all of this. But before I could relax, pouring myself a glass of wine, I stopped by the balcony, looking out at the dark city, and realized that it wasn't so simple. I wanted to meet him again. And, perhaps, not only to get answers. I woke up to a knock on the door. The sharp, persistent sound forced me to get up abruptly, despite the heaviness of sleep, and I rubbed my eyes, trying to focus. It was already almost noon, and I hadn't even realized how much I had slept. But that knock. It wouldn't let me rest. Getting out of bed, I fumbled my way to the door, not having time to dress, and opened it. Standing in the doorway, I saw him, Lee Min-hyuk. My heart immediately started racing, and I was surprised to realize that I had opened the door in just a robe, without any clothes underneath, not having the slightest idea he was standing there. His gaze was both puzzled and a little embarrassed. In that instant, I understood how strange this must have looked, and before I could say anything, I quickly grabbed the robe and put it on, trying to hide my awkwardness. "What are you doing here?" I asked, looking at him and feeling the uncertainty creeping into my voice. Lee Min-hyuk hesitated for a moment, and I saw how genuinely surprised he was by my appearance. There was a hidden emotion in his eyes that I didn't recognize. "I came to apologize," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I was a bit drunk back then." "And you?" "You were too seductive for me to think about anything else." I froze. I didn't know what to say. He really seemed to regret it, but everything about this was so unfamiliar to me. Something made me relent, and I stepped back, letting him into the apartment. "Come in. Would you like some coffee?" I felt the bitterness of the words fade, replaced by surprise and curiosity. I still didn't understand why he was here, but I held back my question. He entered, sat down on the sofa, and silently looked at me. I made coffee, trying to think about what his visit could mean. We sat in silence, drinking our beverages, each of us seemingly absorbed in our own thoughts. Finally, Lee Min-hyuk broke the silence. "So, what do you want to know?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. His gaze was calm, but there was a mystery in it. I didn't expect such a question. I instinctively choked, almost spilling my coffee, but managed to compose myself. He was surprising me more and more. "I want to know about your past," I said, trying not to reveal how much this moment was troubling me. "I wanted to know what led you to success, how you ended up here. Where did you grow up?" Lee Min-hyuk fell silent. He set his cup aside and looked at me strangely, as though weighing whether or not to answer. Time seemed to stretch, and I could feel the air between us growing tense. "I was a child when my parents disappeared. They just vanished," he said, his voice quiet, almost painfully calm. "And shortly after that, some people barged into the house. They weren't familiar, they weren't friends. Just people who came in and started demanding something. I was scared and ran away. I lived in an abandoned store on the street. I didn't know where to go, and I didn't know what to do." My heart tightened at those words. But that was just the beginning of the story. He continued, Do you remember what I looked like? I often noticed you when you walked down that street. You were always around. You saw me, didn't you? You gave me food, clothes. I was in love with your kindness. It was so unexpected and bright in the horror I was living in. You always helped me. I couldn't say a word. My heart was pounding in my chest. How everything was connected. This boy, the one I had met once, it was him. He was the very person I had helped, and now here he was, sitting in front of me, so strong and successful. He sighed and continued, "Those same people found me. They forced me to go with them so they could confirm their guardianship and get money from my parents. But I knew it wasn't real. They didn't care about me. They just wanted the money. I signed away my inheritance, but I demanded money for education at a prestigious university in return. That's all I asked for, and they gave it to me." I sat in silence, processing what I had just heard. Everything was falling into place. I realized that now, before me stood not just a successful man. Before me stood a person who had been torn from his childhood, who had everything he loved taken from him. And I was the girl who once extended a helping hand to him. At that moment, his eyes met mine. He was silent for a few seconds, and then, unexpectedly, he took my hand. I felt his warm fingers, as if they were holding onto me. "You're the one who didn't let me give up. You're the one who gave me hope when I was at rock bottom. You didn't let me stay on the street, you gave me a chance." His words pierced me through and through. At that moment, while I was still trying to process everything he had said, he leaned in and kissed me gently. It was something incredible. I felt him transmit his gratitude and the pain he had gone through. He kissed me, and I felt the barriers between us disappear. When he pulled away, I still couldn't believe that this was actually happening. But he had said everything I needed to hear. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just a witness to his past. I was a part of that past. I silently looked at Lee, not knowing what to say or how to react. This whole moment, his presence next to mine, his breath, he felt so real that I could hardly believe it. There were so many words, so much unsaid, but we both remained silent, and that silence felt so heavy that it echoed in my chest. Lee didn't say a word, but his eyes. They said everything that needed to be said. I saw so much pain and struggle in them, so much pain that he hadn't shown me. And yet, in those eyes, there was also the determination that once drove him onto this path. He didn't move, and I realized that I needed to take a step. I cautiously approached him and extended my hand, expecting nothing. He was confused, but at that moment, everything changed. He took my hand, his fingers, strong and confident, gripping mine. He didn't say anything, but that silence was expressive enough. "Let's go," I said quietly, and without waiting for a response, I led him to the bedroom. The moment the door closed behind us, everything changed. I could no longer hold back the surge of emotions that engulfed me. We stood close, as if there was an invisible distance between us that I couldn't cross. He looked at me with an expression, as though he was trying to understand what was going on inside my soul. And then I felt his hand touch my cheek, his fingers gliding over my skin, and that touch was almost painfully gentle. He moved closer, and his breath became quicker. I knew this moment was important. It was so long awaited, but at the same time, so complicated. When his lips touched mine, it was as if the whole universe shrank to that moment. He was soft but insistent, and I felt the fire within me ignite, as the tension we both couldn't hide any longer finally burst out. He kissed me, his hands now circling my waist, pulling me closer as they explored my body, doing it gently and carefully. I felt I was already ready to fall into this abyss with him. He took off my robe and carefully placed it on the bed, his lips exploring every inch of my body. I removed his shirt, ran my hands over his chest, kissed his neck, and he groaned. I could feel he was ready. He looked at me as if waiting for my consent, and I kissed him back. He entered me gently, and I simply dissolved into him in that moment. After some time, we lay on the bed in silence, and then Lee pulled away, sighing softly. He looked into my eyes, and his gaze was full of pain, but there was also hope in it. And he said quietly, "I've searched for you for a long time, Han. You were the one who kept life in me when I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know what to say. Too much time had passed, too much had happened between us. But I couldn't stay silent, I couldn't help but ask one important question, and still, How did you become who you are now? Lee smiled slightly, and I noticed how his gaze became clouded with memories. After finishing university, I got a job at a company that once was my family. I climbed a little up the career ladder, but that wasn't all. I found documents. Well, found them, stole them. These documents were the act of transferring the company to those bastards, and they were also proof that my parents were killed. There were long investigations, court cases. But in the end, I got my own back, although I decided to sell everything and start with a clean slate. I froze, listening to him. His voice had no fury, no regret, only calm determination. But how did you manage to get through all of that? I asked, not believing in his strength. You wouldn't have recognized me if I hadn't gone through this. All this time, you were my goal, but I knew that someday, after I got everything back that I had lost, I would become someone who wouldn't fear meeting you. Because that meant I had to face my past, which I didn't want to do at that time. I tried to dispel the heavy atmosphere that had settled, saying, "This will be a big sensation, not just an article," I said, half-jokingly. Lee tensed, his face becoming serious. "You shouldn't publish this," he said quietly. Noticing his tension, I gently kissed him on the lips and smiled. "I'm joking, your story won't make it to the public." He took my hand and replied with the same light gesture, as if he felt that this moment was the final point, the conclusion. And in that moment, I closed my eyes, dissolving into his embrace. Everything that had been seemed unimportant. We were here and now, and nothing else mattered.